Well, Fantasy League enjoys, I've gone and done it, haven't I? I've gone and jinxed myself. I said in the last video that if the top 55% was the worst I got this season, I'd be very happy. And then I've one-upped it by getting a top 82% the very next game. It's been rough. I took a bit of a gamble. I explained my reasoning for this in the last video. You can go back and watch that if you want to know exactly. But basically, I thought that Nip would have a very easy first game against Amcal, who had Topo, who'd been struggling, and then they didn't even have a fifth player, so their coach was coming to play for them. And it was one of the worst games of Counter-Strike that I can remember seeing. And I've watched a lot of Counter-Strike over the years. I casted and watched a lot. It was shambolic. All my faith in Nip has been completely torn away. And it's going to take a lot for them to regain that faith in me, at least. Because it was so bad, the Counter-Strike that I was watching, that I wish I could unsee it. But unfortunately, it does also mean that I get wrecked in my fantasy league because they lost their first game, minus 2 points for Isaac, minus points consistently from that point because obviously they lost in the first game, so they got -3 each time. So Wrinkle only got me 4, and he cost like 215k. And I didn't back FaZe because I wanted to go for a different route, and it's completely backfired. VP were pretty rough as well. In all honesty, they barely scraped by to play off against Falcons, who ended up beating them. They scraped by Big and probably should have lost against Big, if I'm being completely honest. So this could have been even worse. I could have been like the top 90, 95%. And Snow, who was very cheap, got me 3 points. And I was relatively pleased with Pain, though. I think that they are getting better and better. A couple of notable wins. Obviously, they beat Cloud9, which was huge. But then they kind of subsided as the tournament went on and lost against FaZe, which was to be expected. So overall, a complete disaster. We move quickly. The only bit of copium I have is I'm still joint with Maniac, who had an equally shocking performance. So we're joint in 14th position, and there's only 6 games been played. So that's all the positives out the way. Let's move on to BetBoom Dacha Belgrade. I think this tournament is an easier one, and kind of the players pick themselves to a degree. So you'll see when I go through to the next part and I show you the prices of the players, there's 2 teams you're really looking at here as far as I'm concerned, because they're on opposite sides of the bracket, so they're the 2 best teams, not just in terms of like HLTV ratings or any of those things. They are just the 2 best teams at the tournament, and that's Mouse and Spirit. Now, I know that Spirit have come under some flack for their performances at Cologne, getting smashed by G2, obviously getting put down in the first place from the Mongols, I believe it was. They had a rough go over. Let me just double check that it was the Mongols. I'm pretty sure it was, but just let me check this one out real quick. It was, let me have a look here. Yes, the Mongols. They lost 2-0 to Mongols and 2-0 to G2. So that's where a lot of the flack is coming from. And like the nature and how they lost to G2 was a real, obviously, problem. But I think people having a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. One bad tournament doesn't define a team. Right, one rough event doesn't undo all of the good that we've seen from Spirit, the amount of talent this team has. Now, obviously, if it moves into 2 or 3 tournaments, then that's a different thing. Then you can start to look at it being a pattern rather than a freak occurrence. And there may be some of shakiness before for Spirit, but I think it's crazy that Chopper felt a need to come out in an interview and basically say, we're not making any changes. I never expected changes to come in before the major or after the major for this Spirit team. But that's the nature of the beast, I suppose. The pressure mounts and then people need to ask questions. I think this tournament, though, I'm leading all of this up to the fact that I think this tournament is going to be where Spirit want to make an example out of some of these teams. And Spirit are going to be really hyped and inspired and motivated to come in here and put in a real serious effort. I'm expecting Spirit to maybe win the whole thing, but I certainly expect them to make it through to the finals. Now, if they get smashed by Falcons in the first game and they crash and burn again with 2-0-2s, that's going to be a huge shock for me personally. I will put a devil's advocate sort of caveat in the mix, though, that Falcons surprised me in a very positive way at Blast. They actually played some good Counter-Strike. We saw Sun Pius being joined by Madden and Dupree, and Snappy had a couple crazy performances himself as well. 34-year-old talent. Really impressed with Falcons for the most part, and they managed to make it through and deserved it, you know. Sure, some of the teams they were playing against looked a little bit sloppy. They beat M80 in their first game. They then beat Complexity and then beat VP. That's 2 legit wins back to back. And you can say what you will about Complexity and Virtus Pro. Can't take the wins away from Falcons. So they come into the tournament with a bit of a hot streak. Though, in the play-ins, they did lose to 9Z, a team they really should be beating. So, Falcons, they've had a bit of a hot streak. I don't necessarily think that matters against Spirit, to be completely frank with you. I think Spirit still come in here in a best of 3, and they should 2-0 this and beat the Falcons. VP and Furia, I don't see either of these teams being able to contend with Spirit. They're just too strong. I think they make it through to the finals. And the same could be said for Mouse. You're starting against Eternal Fire, who are like a pretty legit team. It's always, Xantares and Wakadia, and what are these two guys going to do with Woxic kind of like more of a peripheral player as far as I can see. I think he's capable of great things, but I just don't see enough from Woxic consistently to really believe. But I still do rate Eternal Fire as a solid outfit and a solid team. It's going to be more of a test, I think, for Mouse. But I think Mouse, if they do win that game, which I expect them to, should breeze through Heroic or Pain. Pain have looked better, but they're still not at Mouse's level, and Heroic have been all over the place. Like, Heroic are having a real struggle here. So, as far as I'm concerned, Heroic need to kind of start to prove to the world that they actually belong at tournaments of this stature. Qualifying is one thing, but doing anything at the tournament's an entirely different ball game. The only good news, I suppose, for some of these teams that we don't expect to win is that they will have a lower bracket. So it's possible that, like, if Eternal Fire or if Pain or if Heroic lose early on, they can still make it through the lower bracket system and can still actually go pretty far in the tournament. So it's not just a one and done. So it's important to mention that with the whole best of 3s on top of it. But this is the team I'm going to go for. I had $1,000 left in surplus after this squad, and I'm going to show you here by editing the lineup why I've gone for this team. So I made it pretty obvious. I think Spirit and Mouse should make it to the finals, and I've decided to go for Shiro, Chopper, Jimmy, and Shui off those teams, mainly for budget concerns, but I also think Chopper and Shui, in terms of IGLs, have high capacity to get points, especially as you can whack like a leader on Shui. I expect him to win. Chopper is very good with like the eco fragger buff. I can't remember what it's actually called, and so you can whack those on those players, but I'm mainly building this around Shiro and Jimmy to do work. Now, Jimmy, interestingly, over the last 3 months, has a higher rating than Exertion and has been playing, for the most part, at a higher level as far as I'm concerned, but he's actually cheaper by $4,000. This feels like a steal to me. A player of Jimmy's capacity being the 3rd most expensive player on Mouse behind Torji and Exertion, kind of crazy. I think that's a bit of a bargain. I'd be expecting to pay more, especially at a tournament here where I think Mouse and Spirit are head and shoulders above the rest of the opposition. I was expecting Jimmy to be 215 to 220, so 212 is great as a price point. Spent a little bit more on Shiro, but for me, I think for Spirit, you're either looking at Donk, who I understand some people might be a little bit skeptical over with how he's playing at Cologne. He's 8,000 less than Donk, but there's a pretty big drop-off between Shiro and the rest of the team. So from Shiro to Zontix, I believe Zontix was 207. Yeah, and then you have Magix at 202. Can't really justify going for either of them. I'd rather go for the firepower and then also whack the AWP roll on Shiro or multi-fragger or something else on Shiro. And I think he's going to deliver. So I'm fully banking off the idea of this being a Mouse VP finals or both of them going really far in the tournament, and I feel pretty comfortable with this. I think this is quite safe. The only sort of gamble or choice I had to make at the end was who was I going to make as my 5th player. So Snow's 187k. I was pretty impressed with Pain. I was pretty impressed with Snow for the most part. He had a couple of very solid rounds where he just went full entry frag. I'm thinking about Mirage in particular. He went out and just got a 3k by himself. Like, really impressive stuff. Very young. And I think as he continues to play, he's only going to get better. So Snow for 187 to me felt like pretty good value for money, but I was between him, Norbert, who's 188, again, I've got $1,000 left, and Cello was the other player. I watched today in the BetBoom play-ins, I watched Cello play up against Eternal Fire, and he actually had a really good performance in Dust 2, and I was quite impressed with him. A 1.01 rating for 184k is pretty damn good value for money. The problem is that Furia are playing against VP, and the fact that this is such a weird game where VP look horrible to me. Furia, I'm still not entirely sure about this 5-man roster with Skulls. Obviously, you got K-Sarot and Yuri, who are dependably good. I don't know what to make between that Furia and VP game, so I'm going to go with Pain instead, and I think Heroic have looked pretty damn bad. So I could see Pain getting that W and Snow getting me quite a few points with 187k. But obviously, it should go without being said that ultimately here I'm banking pretty hard on Spirit and Mouse to do bits here, to get Ws in their first games pretty convincingly, Jimmy and Shiro to pop off, and hopefully Chopper and Shui both have a good map here or there. And I'm just trying to be safe here, guys. I've learnt my lesson from that NIP double pick. That was an absolute disaster. So we're going to go back to normalcy and hope that things don't go horribly wrong here. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. Fingers crossed I do better than top 82%. I've probably just jinxed myself again, haven't I?